a tough act to follow. Donald was great. I'm Eboni Major. I am a food scientist at heart. I currently work in the bourbon industry, but I'm going to tell you about my journey. A little bit different from Donald. I'm still navigating an all-white space. As you know, the liquor industry is built on racism. So it's a bit difficult. So I haven't gotten there yet. I don't have all the answers, but I've been there 4 years. I am the first and still the only to do what I do. So I'm going to just walk you guys through what I felt has been the way that I can continue to stand in my truth, because I will tell you, it's not easy every day. Every day I'm the strong one, you know, I can potentially be the bitter black person, you know, I can be all of those things that we all experience as a minority. But first, I graduated from HBCU, Alabama A&M University. I got my BS in food science. I used to want to cook, but I was like, no, I don't think I have the creative gene. I don't think I have that. I want to do something a little bit more stable, a little bit more consistent, something I know is going to bring me some good money long term without me having to fight too hard for it. But I went through a rough patch in school and lost scholarships, wasn't able to get up and do what I needed to every day. And I had to figure out how I'm going to elevate myself. How am I going to position myself to get where I need to in the next place and next stage in life? So I continue to volunteer for different people. Can I work in your lab for free? You know, these are government-funded labs, but they're still paying, you know, these college students $6 and $7 an hour because it's okay. So I continued to do that, and then I decided to go and start my master's degree. But halfway in my master's degree, I was like, Eboni, you didn't do any internships as an undergrad. Your GPA sucks. How are you going to stand up against the rest of the competition? So I left grad school and I went to work for a company in Oregon. They make kettle chips. And I did that internship, but it wasn't for me. And I was like, I don't really want to go back to school. School is always the safe answer. It literally is always the safe answer. It's always there. You can be a career student and people will think you're successful. You know, you'll just do it. So I said, no, you know, screw it. I'm going to take a leap of faith. I'm going to do this internship. And that's what my job started off as. It was an internship for 1 year. And then I've been there ever since. I never left. But when I introduced myself to people, hi, I'm Eboni. I work in whiskey, you know. Oh, you work in the whiskey industry. What do you do? No, I am not a woman in whiskey. I am the woman behind the whiskey. Like, it really irritates me when I sit on some panels and people say women in whiskey. Like, no, I'm more than that. I am literally the woman behind the bottle, because I'm not just working in whiskey. I'm not in marketing. I'm not in admin. I'm not in packaging. I am the woman creating the flavors that you sip every day when you pick up that bottle. So that for me was a journey. You know, I started off as an intern. I work with a great guy, a master blender. His father worked for the company. You know, I am the only one that kind of got my job without knowing somebody. I literally went on Indeed.com and found the job. And just working through that space and having to continue to prove yourself has been difficult. You know, I'm 4 years in, but what do? I smell and taste whiskey all day. How stressful can it be? You know, like, it's very stressful, let me not lie. Keeping up with millions of barrels of product is stressful, but it was a process. Like, when I talk about it being built on racism, I sit at a facility in Shelbyville, Kentucky, and for the first 2 years, I was the only black person in the office, you know, until we hired a warehouse operator. And imagine how that makes you feel. You know, I'm still the only black person in the office. That guy works on the night shift moving barrels. So people always ask me all the time, you know, well, how does it feel? How does it feel? It's not easy. You get the stigmas, you know, because I am not a quiet person. I can go in a meeting and I will tell you, I will be the only black person, the only young person, and when I say young, under 30, and I am the only African American. And so being a triple minority in a room, so I'm basically just sitting in a room full of old white men telling me how to make bourbon. Telling me, oh, you don't know enough, you haven't been here long enough. You're right, but guess what? I have a degree in food science, not in microbiology. I know exactly what I'm doing. So you know, as I've gone through this industry, I've been here for 4 years. I've really found, I'm sure you guys have heard of Uncle Nearest, which is, how many of you guys have heard of Fawn Weaver? She started the brand. That is a competitor of ours, but I love the brand because now there is a space that is awarding us for what we really have done. And she's finally recognizing the fact that a slave was the guy who taught Jack Daniels how to make whiskey. And so now you're starting to see companies embrace, and then bourbon. Black people, we love bourbon. We drink it, we cook with it. It's, you know, a celebratory thing, but not only that, there's so much buying power that we have that companies are now starting to appreciate that. And me navigating that space, I'm always there as an advocate. You know, for me to elevate myself, I've always started at the bottom. Nowhere I've gotten in my life have I didn't just become a whiskey blender. I started as an intern, and then I had to do an apprenticeship for 2 to 3 years. That apprenticeship was supposed to take me 4 to 5, but I worked my butt off to get there. And not only that, I do extra work for my marketing team. I do extra work for other teams. So for me, in this space, elevating myself has literally been just navigating through different spaces and positioning myself in areas where there's nobody else like me. You know, I'm going to them and say, okay, what are we going to do to reach this market? How are you going to help me as the Black employee make sure that our marketing, that our events, when I go to a company event, that I'm not counting on my fingers the people that look like me. And so that's just something that I'm working through now. But I'm going to talk about my job, and then I'm going to leave it open for you guys to ask me any questions that you may have. And so what it is that I do, I smell whiskey every day of my life. I smell maybe 50 samples of whiskey before it goes into barrels, and then after it comes out of barrels. We do a lot of whiskey formulations. I create what's in the bottle year after year. Not only do I work on Bulleit Bourbon, I work on George Dickel Tennessee whiskey, I.W. Harper, which is a bourbon that is in the U.S. and as well as Asia. But in my job, I've learned how to distill and manipulate flavors. My nose is my most prized possession. There are certain things I can't do now that I used to be able to do 4 years ago, like fly on an airplane. You know, just the simple things in life have become more of a task because my nose is so sensitive, and I use it for a job that is creating flavors. And when I say creating flavors, we distill flavors in the science, in the production area, but then again, once it comes out of the barrel. So once it comes out of the barrel, liquid has all different flavors because of the science of the maturation. And so my job as a whiskey blender is to manipulate and create those flavors and make sure there's a consistent liquid at the end of the formulation process. I'm gonna open it up for questions because I can talk you guys science to death. I literally can. Oh, you can go first, yeah.
Actually, I might have 2 questions, if you don't mind. Is there room for, you know, us Black African Americans, is there room for us to get involved in the industry on the whiskey side? Do you see opportunities for us? And then the other part is, do you see yourself as a person that help other entrepreneurs build brands in that industry and do what you're doing now?
So the first question, you know, I read an article recently that said there's too many craft distilleries and not enough qualified people. And I call bull on that because there is qualified people, but they're not giving everybody the opportunities. Most of the people that are working in this industry, their mom knows somebody there. They have a cousin that works there or a family friend, or they went to a party and introduced themselves. So I think there's absolutely opportunities out there. You may just not start in the area that you absolutely want to be in. If you want to be on the production side, you may have to start in marketing. Go ahead.
What I meant was, like somebody like who's, okay, I like liquor, I want to be an investor, I want to start my own liquor.
So to that point as well, you can start a brand. It doesn't take a lot. Our brand started off and we didn't have a distillery. Do not let the idea or the image of a distillery having a production facility be what you think you need. Yes, it takes millions to do that, but our founders started Bulleit Bourbon in the 80s. And we were a sourced liquid, so we were buying liquid from other people and then taking it and creating it. There's a guy, I'm not sure the brand, in Texas, a young guy that just started what he calls the first African American owned bourbon whiskey. So if you have the means or you have the connections, you can absolutely invest and create your own brands, because people are going to buy it because of your face. I would absolutely encourage you to do that, because there's not enough diversity in the industry. There's not. Did that answer your second question?
No, the second question was, will you play an important role to those entrepreneurs who's going to be like tapping into that market? Because I feel like as you continue your journey speaking, talking about these things, there's going to be people that's going to want to be like,
Is this being recorded? We'll see me after. We'll see me after. No, I work for the largest alcohol producer right now, but that's not where my future may be.
And the reason why I say that is, how is it the industry ever going to break open if we don't have somebody like you to kind of cultivate that outside world for us?
It's not going to. Yeah, and that's the thing, is you have to, moonlighting, is something I do on the side, consulting, trying to but I need people that look like me to be able to be willing to take those risks, to invest their money, and I can help guide you to get there. But right now, just learning the industry is really important to me. I'm only 4 years in. I have to absorb all of that information that I can before I can go and leap and teach others how to do it as well. Did you?
I have a very basic question. What does bad whiskey smell like?
What does bad whiskey smell like? Bad whiskey can smell like soil. Bad whiskey can smell like your grandmother's basement. Bad whiskey can smell like, there's so many things. What I consider, I won't say bad, but less pleasurable for me is a whiskey, once it gets around 14, 15 years old, it smells like acetone nail polish remover. And there's a market that I make that for that loves it. It goes straight to Asia. They love the acetone. I also have a bottle on my desk that was made in 1989 that smells like just straight caramel vanilla. Like there's so much different flavor you can get out of a particular whiskey distilled in a year and put in a specific barrel. And because people don't understand, the most uncontrollable part of a bourbon is the barrel. The tree grew. It sat there. There's nothing you control about that process. I do all my work on the front end to make sure the distiller is doing it exactly how we would like it. But once it goes in that barrel, I have no control over it. And that's why my team, we get a sample of every barrel every year. We appraise it. We give it a quality code and see what specific characteristic it has so that we know what to use and what not to use. Any other questions?
So you mentioned something interesting about not being able to fly.
Yes.
Why is that?
My nose is super sensitive now. Because I am training my nose to pick out flavors at 20% alcohol. So when you are drinking your liquor, most times it's 35 to 45% ABV. I'm doing it at 20%. And I do it at 20% ABV because I can't leave work drunk every day, one. And second, because there's more flavors that scientifically, if you add more water, the ethanol releases more molecules that you can appraise, and it's harder to pass a test at 20%. And so from smelling all those whiskeys, Tennessee's, the company I work for also owns Crown Royal, just smelling all those different things, your nose changes. I only do perfume on the weekends. I only eat certain things during work hours. It's just very sensitive because of that. Yes.
I learned about that applicable to other industries like coffees.
Wine, absolutely. I would say wine, perfumeries, any flavoring companies that create flavored drinks, or coffee, I'm not so sure, because coffee is, if you go in a department store, coffee is usually what they use to break up your senses in between your colognes and your perfumes. But it's not that bad. Look, I have a job where I sit in a room full of whiskey all day. If you need a break, you got a bottle right there. No, you do. I don't drink on the job, you guys. I don't. It's all research. Whatever people ask me what's in my cup, research. But no, does anybody else have any questions about the process, making whiskey? More science. I can talk to you about science all day long. Yes.
So you're talking about the smells of different, like what makes a bad whiskey smell like soil?
Yeah.
What are the factors that cause those different?
So there are multiple factors. So at Bulleit, we're quality focused from grain to glass. So there's three main areas where you're gonna get your grains. You have corn, malted barley, and rye. And so if you're a farmer, we have non-GMO corn, but if you're a farmer, harvest it using some dirty equipment or he didn't clean his truck, that's your first area for contamination. After you receive that corn, you mill it. If your equipment isn't clean, that can give you. Fermentation is your biggest area. When you add grains and you're adding yeast to turn those sugars into alcohols, if you have any microactivity in there at all, some of that cannot be washed out of the system because you have created your flavors right there. And then the other part of the process, distillation, is time and temperature. If you're not burning off those fumes, in the alcohol production process, there's three areas that liquid comes off. We call them the heads, the hearts, and the tails. We always want the hearts. The hearts is where you get the good liquid. If you have too much of the heads, it gives you like this butterscotch note. And while that may seem favorable to you when you smell it, that's what causes hangovers. The congeners in the heads is what causes people to have hangovers. And the tails is what we also recycle to give the alcohol companies to make acetone and nail polish remover. So though that area of the process will give you flavors that you may or may not want, and then the last is the maturation process once it's aging in the barrel. But you can get things what we call slightly green. I've seen Dorito chips, the smell of cheese Doritos in a whiskey before. I've seen rancid when you don't clean out your vegetable drawer out of your fridge. You can get, there's so many flavors that you can get. And it's hard to control those, and that's my job as a blender, is to try to catch it before it goes in the barrel, because after it's in the barrel, there's nothing we can do. But at the end of the day, it's a business. Even if you have characters, we have some that we absolutely reject and we wouldn't use, but my job is to be able to potentially use those liquids at 1 or 2% of my blend where that flavor isn't impacting the rest of the liquid. Yes?
Could you kind of talk about the history of whiskey? Because like you have Scotch whiskey,
Yes.
Canadian whiskey, then like out in Kentucky, I was talking about the lime and water.
Yes. So you can make bourbon here in Ohio. Like everybody talks about Kentucky being bourbon country. 95% of bourbon comes from Kentucky, but the main rules to be a bourbon are it has to be at least 51% corn. You can't distill it above 160 proof, and it can't go in proof. Proof is ABV times 2. So if you have 50% ABV, it's 100 proof. And lastly, it has to go in a new barrel. And so what's different about Scotch is, and whenever I go and talk to people, they say, well, what's your favorite, expression? My favorite expression has always historically been rum before I got into bourbon. And I didn't know at the time that rum has so much influence from bourbon, because bourbon is the one liquor that uses first used barrels. You can't use any used barrels in bourbon production. But once we finish with our bourbon, we send them to the Caribbean, or we send them to Canada, or we send them to Scotland for them to age their whiskey in. And so the difference in Scotch is using more peated. So if you've had a Scotch, sometimes they say it is very like campfire, smoky flavor to it. And that's because of the process in which they create the grains that are used. The grains are peating through this process that creates germination. I'm going to try not to go too deep into science. And germination is what's going to bring out the character and produce those carbs that will allow that alcohol to be produced from sugar. Like I said, our company owns Crown Royal, so the Canadian whiskey is very similar to bourbon, but the difference is mainly that maturation process. They're using one we call base whiskeys, which is a creamier, smoother flavor of a liquor, and then they go into used barrels. And because they go into used barrels, they have a lighter flavor than most of the bourbons would. Bourbon and Canadian whiskeys are different in their maturation process, and you're going to get a little bit more woody, oaky notes out of bourbon because of that. And rums, we all know rums are made from molasses or sugarcane. Rum is one that is very difficult to make because of that. It's a super raw, viscous, thick ingredient, but it's distilled and created in the same process. As far as the brand I work on, it was created in the 80s. Tom Bulleit took his great-grandfather's recipe and requested it to be made from a distillery. So the way we created our whiskey before 2016, when we had our own distillery, was we would contract with distilleries. So if you're out there looking to create your own brand, I would say research some of these third-party distilleries, because if you go into your liquor store and you count the number of bourbons and brands out there, there may be 100 brands and there's only maybe 20 distilleries. So 20 is a slim number, but the number of brands in relation to actual production facilities is very slim. So people are paying those bills by contracting for other brands. They're producing liquid for other brands because their brand may not be receiving the same amount of growth, but they can make liquid for other people and help them out. So that would be an avenue I would suggest. Yes?
What I found out when I started going to like distilleries, because I was actually a designer working on a project with an entrepreneur who was going to release a certain type of brand, right? They was going to do the vodka, right? And when the guy was talking to me, because we were trying to figure out strategy, he was like, look, I'm going to keep it simple with you. He said exactly what you said about it's not that many, everybody's kind of working together. And he was like, everything that you see in a liquor store, all it is marketing. That's how it's not like everybody's got this very unique recipe in a sense. We might have a few, but he was like, it's really just marketing. Everybody's just trying to figure out who's the market there.
Yeah, so if you look at the bourbon industry, most times the celebrity of the bourbon industry is the distiller. You always talk about the master distiller, the guy making it. And for us, we're different. Because we did source liquid once upon a time, we had to find a way to make ourselves different. And I am that difference. The team I work on, we are that difference. So while we have the same liquid, I've created a formula and used 2% of the same liquid plus or minus, and that liquid looks completely different. So having someone on the back end that's actually, playing with the different flavors or whatever barrels you have and you've purchased, create those liquids does give you a little bit of difference between the person next to you.
Can you speak on when people say 3 times distilled versus however many times distilled? Can you speak on that?
Yes, so there's different types of distillation processes. You have what is a pot still, which is done in batches, and what you have as a column still. And we use a column still, so it's just going all at one time. When I talked about the heads, the hearts, and the tails, when you blow those off and you put them in what we call a doubler, you redistill it, and then you redistill it. And that's basically what you're doing. You're trying to get the cleanest product possible. So if you distill it multiple times, you're getting the cleanest liquid that you can and preventing all those extra congeners from the heads and the tails to get into your hearts. What liquid are you talking about 3 times distilled?
Like the rock.
Okay, because our company owns Ciroc too. That's one of our brands that we have, and that's from, is it Italy, I think? France, yeah.
We got time for one more question.
Can we take 2, if you don't mind? Okay.
Option working in like a male-only
Yes.
right now industry. How do you deal with like the stereotypes when you come into here, just like seeing yourself, like maybe like comments that you shouldn't be saying, but here you go with this, and it's just like you don't want to have anybody else who understands like and being like
This week I had the first time, it was the first time I had a conversation with a coworker where I felt like I wasn't crazy. And they work in the New York office. It's hard. I mean, I'm a G at work, but I get home and I let them tears flow. You know, I'm gonna be honest with you, because I'm not one to just, you're not gonna pick on me. You know, I'm gonna sit in this room and I'm not going to. One time I kept emailing somebody and I needed something from them, and they kept coming back with just nonsense. They kept saying, you know, just lying about it. And my manager said, well, why don't you word it this way? And I said, I am never, ever. And I said, you should not ever tell a woman to dumb themselves down to get the right response from somebody. And that was his suggestion. His suggestion was, maybe you should say, well, maybe I have something wrong. Am I missing something? I'm not missing anything. You just don't want to tell me the truth. You don't want to give me the numbers so that I can do what I have to do. And hearing him tell me that, you know, it pissed me off. I was like, I'm never, especially getting where I am now with nobody's help, I'm not going to dumb myself down just to make myself more palatable. I'm not going to do it. And so I take that with me in every meeting. I say what I say and I mean what I say. And whether they take it or they don't, you know, I've gotten an email from people like, they've typed my name in the email and they started off with the title, with the greeting, gentlemen. Like, you are the one that sent the email. So it's not easy, but I've also learned as a woman and as a Black woman, I have had to lean on men to be an ally for me. As women, it's sometimes difficult for us to build each other up in spaces. And so I've leaned on men and put challenges to them to call out other men when they see something that should be done very differently.
So I was at the bar last night. I actually had some Bulleit Bourbon, and I requested it on ice with like a cherry, and the bartender looked at me like a peasant. So can you give us like the top three, like we're going to taste bourbon. What are the top three things we need to like experience?
One, screw anybody that makes you feel like that, okay? Because my first few months in the job, I was like, okay, I can't handle this. This is a lifestyle, not a job. It's intimidating. These bourbon enthusiasts make you feel like, oh, you're drinking that? Ignore them. But one, I make Bulleit and I don't drink it on ice. Don't do that on ice. Get it in a cocktail. Get it in a cocktail and ease your way into it. I like fruity things, so I always go with a smash. There's a drink, it's literally some ginger, simple syrup, and some peaches muddled with a little bit of mint and Bulleit and some ginger ale. It's good. I would say try it with a smash, anything with fruit. But then I also like coffee. My new thing is coffee and alcohol. I've had a coffee old-fashioned. If somebody can make you a cold brew old-fashioned, I would say try that. But then try it neat. You know, I think I was just talking to my fiance last night about creating like a safe space for people to try things, because you go to the bar and it's like you said, it's intimidating. You don't know what to order, but you want to try something. So I would say go buy a bottle or two with your friends and go on Pinterest, try you some recipes, or just try it neat, because you don't want to get to somewhere and you're like, I don't know what they're going to say if I order this, or ask them what they recommend. Since they're the expert, what do you recommend, you know? That's it. All right. Thank you guys for having me.